Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening, this lovely spring-like evening for a change. Go ahead and get logged in, and I hope your audio is working. For those, I recognize Alan. Hi, Alan. And I think the other names are familiar from events past. I'm Jen, as you probably remember, from the Baldwin Public Library, here with Caitlin tonight from the Birmingham Museum. While everyone's getting logged in and comfortable in their coffee and their audio, I am gonna throw a few things in the chat for upcoming events, and then I will shortly turn things over to Caitlin. There is a couple things going on in April, but the one I wanted to most mention to you guys is one second. Sorry. Is the Emmett Till, Legacy and Memory of Emmett Lewis Till, A Story of Geography, History, and Racism. It's April 25th. I was talking about it with some of my coworkers, and I just think it's going to be fascinating. I mean, obviously a bit heavy and sad, but also promises to be fascinating and just a really interesting discussion. So I just threw that in the chat. Nice thing is it's a number of weeks away, so you might not have your life planned out that far yet. So that's something to think about attending. At the end of the program, I know Caitlin always talks about it. I will put the two links for the two next museum events for May and June, and I'll throw those in so you can click on those and register for them before we log off. And of course, they're always on our calendar. And one other thing for anyone who attends any of our, we have a genealogy series that's going monthly also. And the next subject in our genealogy series is decoding death records. So, I mean, it's great if you've been able to attend all of them, but they don't rely on one another. If you're at all interested in genealogy, I feel really stupid right now. I just completely blanked out on our presenter's name, and I'll remember it as soon as I mute. But she's great. She's an archivist also. And so her program next week on the 14th is going to be about decoding death records. So again, promises to be super interesting. I don't see anybody else. Does anyone have any questions while we're waiting? I'd like to usually give people till 7:05, but that was really quick. Anyone want to talk about the weather? How things are going? All right, well, with that, I think I'm just gonna turn things over to Caitlin. And Kath and Amy, if you don't mind, just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna mute you both. I noticed you're not, just in case your cat decides to share their dinner with us. I know how that can go. Oh, cold? Yeah, I guess it's still a little chilly for April. Oh, speaking of cats, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm, like I said, I will turn things over to Caitlin now. You guys enjoy.
All right, fantastic. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll start the slideshow. So my name is Caitlin Donnelly, and if you're looking for qualifications for why I am talking about Shetland ponies, well, I'm a museum specialist here at the Birmingham Museum, and I'm only a slightly reformed horse girl. So you'll see there's a postcard behind me of an image of ponies on Belle Isle. When I first started working here at the museum, I stumbled across this postcard and I really liked it. And I thought, well, what other equine related things do we have in our collection? And I came across a really cool catalog that I will be sharing with you. And I really kind of uncovered this story of all these, how Birmingham was America's Shetland pony capital. So were we really? The answer to that is yes. So we can all go home now, right? I mean, if you want to, you absolutely can. But there are some caveats to that. Obviously, if you look around Birmingham today, we're no longer America's Shetland pony capital. I don't think there are any Shetland ponies that currently reside within the city limits. So we're really talking about a couple decades here, from about 1890 to about 1930. And just to prove to you my dedication to the topic, yes, I did spend 30 minutes of my time here at the museum coming up with a parody to Justin Timberlake's magnum opus Sexy Back to be about Shetland ponies. And yes, I did tweet it out. Justin did not sue us, so that's a win. And now it resides in the museum's archives forever. So future museum professionals can find it and judge me for it, which is great. I love it. So one thing to kind of talk about before we begin, I know there's a rumor out there, maybe some of you have shared it. It's fine. This is a safe spot. But ponies are not baby horses. So just to clear the air there, we're going to go through just a couple of definitions. What is the difference between a pony and a horse? They're both their own distinct class of equine. So ponies, they're generally under 14 hands. A hand is a really archaic measurement. It's widthwise across your pommel, and it's about 4 inches. So 14 hands is about 56 inches, 4.5 foot. And of course, we measure horses and ponies at the shoulder because we want to make things even more confusing for lay people. So if you need a handy visualization for that, I'm about 5'2" or 5'1.5" if you're my doctor's office and disrespectful. And my shoulder and the tallest pony's shoulder were about level, which is why, you know, generally children ride ponies. Ponies generally have a stockier conformation, so they have shorter, thicker legs, short, thick necks and backs as well. Heavier mane and tails than horses, thicker coat, and they're a little bit hardier. They can live in a little bit more marginalized environments. Whereas horses, they're generally over 14 hands tall, longer neck and legs, a thinner coat, and they have greater nutritional requirements because they are a bit larger. So Gilbert Watkins, he's the guy that our story begins with. He, in 1887, buys a farm in Birmingham, and he is kind of a gentleman farmer. He is basically selling livestock on the evenings and the weekends from his farm in Birmingham. But he's selling insurance by day in Detroit. And so this is actually from his pony catalog that he published in 1892. And he's also, you know, doing a little side hustle here, also selling insurance through Penn Mutual Life. And, you know, this section is helpfully entitled To the Men, because why would women ever need to bother our silly little heads with questions of life insurance? Obviously. So we sometimes think about, you know, people living in Birmingham and commuting into Detroit for work as something that really only started happening post-World War II in the Detroit suburbs. But pretty much from the mid-1800s in Birmingham, people were living here and commuting to work in other communities, prominently Pontiac and Detroit. By that point, railroads connected both those places with Birmingham in between. And so by the late 1800s, I have some figures here, 1897, a ride to Detroit on the railroad cost 15 cents or 30 cents round trip. And every 30 minutes, a train was leaving from Detroit to Pontiac or vice versa. And so doing inflation calculations for any time pre-1913 is really, really sketchy. But that today, a round trip would be between $4 and $8. And again, it only took 30 minutes to get from Birmingham to Detroit. So about half the time that it takes to get anywhere on 696 today. And, you know, $4 to $8, that's like what? A tank and a half of gas, or not, gallon and a half of gas, really, today. So pretty inexpensive and pretty quick. So Gilbert Watkins had a farm in Birmingham, about 320 acres, where the Court and Lake Estates now are. And so in the upper right-hand corner of the screen there, I have a clipping from a May 1887 copy of the Birmingham Eccentric, the local newspaper. And they are talking about, real estate dealings. And they're talking about how Mr. Watkins of Detroit has bought Daniel Stewart's farm near the mill. And he will start doing Jersey stock out of it. They're talking about Jersey cattle. And so this farm is really well situated. It was half a mile from the railroad. So if you're shipping livestock around the country, that is very advantageous. It's well watered by the Rouge River and also the Mill Pond. Then it was known as Watkins Pond. Today, it's gotten an upgrade into a lake. It's Corton Lake today. And lots of shade trees, or at least the literature says lots of shade trees. I have a picture here of a bunch of ponies huddled underneath one tree. So I don't know, maybe we need to take those reports with a little bit of grain of salt. But there were 5 buildings that the livestock was housed in, with 4 buildings for the people who were running the farm, which at its height, there were about 150 employees working with Gilbert and the stock farm. So the newspaper clippings, it's talking about Jersey stock. That's Jersey cattle. We're really not sure when he switched from cattle to ponies, but by 1892, when he publishes his catalog, he has only 1 page devoted to Jersey cattle. And it really seems like he's trying to get rid of the last of his stock. So his cattle phase only lasted a couple of years. And now he's fully on board with ponies, but also poultry and Scotch collies. So the collies are really interesting because he's going to boast in his catalog that the Shetland ponies that he has were purchased in Scotland, and they are the only ponies in the country registered in both the United States and Scotland. He's bragging here the same thing about his collies. He's saying that he bought the dam and the sire in Scotland for $50 a piece. And you can buy the puppies for $7 for the male, $5 for a female, and $3 if you want them shipped. And no, I have no idea what the limitations or guidelines for shipping livestock back in those days were. I don't know, maybe you just put a name tag on it and threw it on a train. I'm really not sure. So he seems to really have a real affinity for Scottish breeds and also breeds from the UK. Jersey cattle are from the Isle of Jersey in the UK. So that's really interesting. We don't really have any direct connections between Gilbert Watkins and Scotland. Like, he didn't have family there. He wasn't really an immigrant from there. But there were a lot of things going on in this period of time in America as to how he might have connected and formed an affinity with both these modes of livestock. And that is, there's a huge wave of immigration from Scotland to the United States and Canada in the 1800s. And in fact, like, there's a huge outpouring in the 1800s, kind of tapers off there. And we haven't seen a huge wave of immigrants from Scotland since that big. And there's 2 basic reasons for this. One, a lot of middle-class people were coming of age in Scotland and realizing there's not a whole lot of opportunities here. There's a couple of recessions going on worldwide, and Scotland's kind of got the brunt end of the stick on that. So they're looking to move abroad. The second one, if you are interested in literature and media surrounding like 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s Scotland, you probably know a little bit about that. And this is the Highland clearances. And so this was a period of time, historians kind of date the Highland clearances between 1750 and 1860. And this was a period of time where the demand for wool all around the world was really booming. So a lot of large landholders in Scotland were moving away from small scale farming to wool production. So a lot of sheep husbandry happening. You need a lot of grazing land for all those sheep. So they're kicking out their tenant farmers, many of whom had been working the lands that they lived on for generations. And they're converting that into large scale grazing operations. And this is leaving tons of people suddenly without homes. A lot of them were kicked out very suddenly. They didn't really have anywhere else to go. So a lot of these people are moving into smaller communities, a lot of them focused on the coast, called crofter communities. And these are communities that are getting by doing quarrying, fishing, and gathering kelp. And suddenly these communities, who were already getting by on pretty slim margins, suddenly had a whole new population of people coming in and seeking to live there, and many of whom had only known small scale farming in their past. So a lot of these communities were failing. And the Scottish government recognized that this disaster was kind of unfurling. And they started encouraging a lot of people to immigrate elsewhere. And a lot of people, since most of them spoke English as a primary language, chose other English speaking nations to settle in. So a lot of people, the biggest chunk of these folks who were moving because of the clearances, settled in New Zealand. But America and Canada weren't very far behind in that as well. So this slide that I have up here shows the percentage of population change in Scotland from about 1831 to 1911. So a pretty big chunk of time there, but we can see a really dramatic change that's going on. So the areas in red had the largest population change. Over 20% of their population has moved away. The green area is a little bit more stable, but a lot of regions lost between 10 and 47% of their total population. So there were some regions that were just almost cleared out. And that's not even a light skim of the history of the Highland clearances. I cannot do it justice in this time and also talk about all the other things that we're going to talk about, but it is a really big topic that's still very raw for a lot of people, and it's influenced a lot of modern history. So if you're interested in that, there's a lot of great sources out there. But yeah, so when people move places, they're not just bringing themselves and their families. A lot of times they're bringing their stories, they're bringing their own personal history, their own specialities. And a lot of people are bringing their family pets. You know, they might have a Scotch collie that they brought with them. They might have brought ponies with them. So people in America and Canada and New Zealand and other places around the world would have gotten familiar with both the people that were coming over and also their livestock as well. So even someone who lived in Birmingham, who worked out of Detroit, might have started to become familiar with Scotch collies and Shetland ponies and started maybe thinking, oh, you know, maybe there's an opportunity here. You know, these are pretty cool animals. There's not a whole lot of them in the United States right now. I can capitalize on this. So in fact, the late 1800s is when the first Shetland ponies came to the Americas. So the American Shetland Pony Club was founded in 1888, and it's actually the first governing body, equine governing body, to be founded in the United States. So pretty cool. So what was happening around the world, and particularly within the United States, that made this a great time for Shetland pony expansion? And the first part of that is going to happen in the UK. And that is because the UK banned child labor in coal mines in the mid 1800s. In fact, in 1846, herds of Shetland ponies are brought south into England to work in the coal mines. A lot of these mines, you can still go and visit them today. A lot of places in northern England. The tunnels that they have are very, very small, because you're not going to waste time and manpower making big, wide tunnels when you can use that time and manpower to get the coal out of the ground and bring it to market. So children are small, they're very compliant. They're used to already obeying adult figures in their lives. So, and of course, you don't have to pay them that much. A lot of these children would make, on average, about a fifth of what a man would be making. And children as young as 4 were working in these mines for 14 to 16-hour days. Pretty horrific conditions. There wasn't a whole lot going by way of safety regulations for these children. There were no mandated breaks, no mandated meal times. And of course, I mean, children as young as 4 for 14 to 16-hour days, that's pretty horrific. And a lot of them were pulling or dragging sledges of coal to the surface. They were in the tunnels themselves, bringing the coal to the surface. So of course, with children out of the question, suddenly now you need ponies, and ponies are even better because you don't even have to pay them. And ponies are working in the same pretty horrific conditions, with one added little piece of horror to it. They're all stabled underground. So these animals were only really seeing the sunlight for a couple days a year during the Collier's holidays. So the average Shetland pony lives to about 20, 25. There's reports of some of them living up to 40 and 50. So for decades and decades, these animals are basically living underground, but they're small, they're strong, and they can get things done. In the United States, there's less of a demand for Shetland ponies for this industry, and that's because mules were preferred. But also it's because child labor in coal mines really wasn't done away with until the New Deal in the 1930s. Laws were tried to pass to limit this in 1916, but they were pretty quickly ruled as unconstitutional. So in 1900, about 18% of the American workforce was children under the age of 16. So that's a lot of children doing a lot of labor. And there was, of course, again, no rules regulating the number of hours they could work, the conditions they worked under, or things like breaks. The photo that I have accompanying this was a series of photos taken of child laborers in the 1910s and 1920s. They were very famous. They were published in a lot of very popular newspapers and publications of the time by social reformers who were trying to show the more privileged, more educated around the nation just what sort of conditions children were living under and working under. And so these two boys, they're about 10 years old, and you can see it looks like they've already put in a hard day's labor. And all that labor was fueling the Industrial Revolution that was happening in the US at that time. And a lot of people were moving from both the rural areas into urban areas to work things like factories, stockyards, shipyards. And in fact, by 1920, for the very first time in our nation's history, more people lived in urban areas than rural areas. And a lot of that was people moving from rural areas in the United States, but a lot of that was fueled by immigration as well. So on the right side on that chart there, you can see that New York, which was a popular destination for immigrants, basically within 40 years, the population almost triples from a little over 1 million to almost 3.5 million people in just 40 short years. Chicago as well goes from about 100,000 to 1.5 million. And so obviously, if you're moving from a more rural area where perhaps you are raising your own livestock, you are raising your own vegetables, you're spinning your own wool, to an urban area where you're living in a small apartment or tenement, you don't have any outdoor space, and you are working 14-hour days in a factory, you're not going to want to put in the labor of spinning your own wool, even if you could. So you're going to want to go out and buy that. And that fuels the demand for large-scale factory farming, factory ranching, and all these other things. So remember I talked about the demand for wool that was exploding at that time? This is a part of that. Less and less people are raising their own sheep and spinning their own wool. They want to go out to the store and be able to purchase that. So immigrants are pouring over the border, searching for new jobs, a better life, more opportunity, like my own great-grandparents who came from Hungary in 1900. And we often refer to the end of the Civil War to 1900 as the Gilded Age. And a lot of times today, you'll hear people using that as sort of just a neutral descriptor of a time period. Like we might talk about the Victorian period or the post-war period. But the term was coined by Mark Twain and a friend of his as a criticism of this age. Because yeah, wages were rising about 48% across the board. The rise of labor unions gave people a lot more leisure time, a little bit more protections in terms of safety and things like breaks and weekends and holidays. But the vast majority of the money coming into the economy was going to the top 1% and 10%. So there was a lot of bad stuff covered by a very thin layer of gold gilding. So the Gilded Age was absolutely meant as a term criticizing this time period. And nowadays, we just use it as a fun descriptor. So wages did rise about 60% from 1860 to 1890. And put a pin in the rise of labor unions, making it for more leisure time. We will get back to that later on. A little bit of foreshadowing there. But in 1892, the Census Bureau reported that the average wage per industrial worker, which included men, women, and children, rose from $380 in 1880 to $564 in 1890. And again, the rise of labor unions, which again is a really fascinating topic. I do not have time to do it justice, made it possible for things like, again, weekends, mandated hours of working. So instead of just working whenever your boss told you to work, now, you had 60 hours a week or 45 hours a week. Suddenly you have time to sleep as well as do a lot of other things. But this is also a rise of monopolies, corrupt political machines. So Tammany Hall is the most famous one. And again, most of that wealth concentrating on the top 1% to 10%. So I chose an 1889 political cartoon called Bosses of the Senate. And so here we see our tiny little senators, and they're all passing laws or whatever, but the real power is at the back of the room. And these are the great big figures, and these are representing industry, monopolies, the very top and the elite and the wealthy, and they're controlling everything. And if you spend a lot of time online, like I do, I'm perpetually online, I run the social media from the museum, you'll see a lot of these Gilded Age era cartoons coming back. A lot of people are feeling a lot of affinity for them because a lot of them are describing a lot of criticisms that a lot of people have today, such as the rising cost of housing, education, and food versus stagnating wages, the rise of the ultra wealthy. So it's really interesting how a lot of, it seems like, American history, it may not repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. So what did Birmingham look like in the 1890s? Like, what was Gilbert's Birmingham? When he walked down the street, what did he see? And this is it. These are two pictures from the turn of the 1900s from our collection, both taken of Woodward Avenue. And so once again, like, the first Model T wouldn't roll off the assembly line until 1913. And in fact, Ford Motor Company was still a couple decades off. It wouldn't be founded until 1903. And cars at that time, they did exist. but they were kind of the playthings of the daredevils and the ultra wealthy. They weren't really reliable. They weren't cheap enough yet for the masses to start enjoying them. So if you wanted to get around, if you weren't going by train, you were going by foot, like the man on the left-hand side. And yes, that is trash on the street. And yes, those are dirt roads. And if you wanted a little bit faster conveyance, you choose horsepower. And in fact, Baldwin School, which used to sit where the Chester Street parking deck is today, across the street from the museum, that school, because it did include a high school, attracted students from all over the region whose communities didn't have high schools. So they would send their high school students to Birmingham's high school. And so a lot of these students were traveling great distances. And so in the area where Cheyne Park is today, there was a barn for the horses and the ponies that were bringing these children to school every day. And if you live in Michigan, ponies are a great bet, right? They're small, they're hardy, they're adorable, and they're a little bit easier to feed and house than a large scale horse. So let's talk about why Shetland ponies are so inclined, are so great for the environment in Birmingham. And that has everything to do with where they come from, which is the Shetland Isles, which is a group of 100 islands, only about 16 of which are inhabited, that are 105 miles off the northeast coast of Scotland. So I have actually two maps here, very interesting story behind them. And the one on the left, you'll see that the Shetland Isles are kind of like a little inset, like on maps of the United States today. You'll often see Hawaii and Alaska as little insets. And that means like they're far away, but we're bringing them closer just for the sake of the map. Well, a lot of people were seeing that and not realizing what that inset meant. A lot of bureaucrats in Scotland, actually. And there was a little bit of an uproar a couple decades ago when somebody who worked for the National Post Office decided that since the Shetland Isles were so close, it shouldn't be hard for postal workers to go there and back a couple times a day, right? And people pointed out, like, it's 105 miles. It's a little bit more than a hop, skip, and a jump. So they actually passed a law saying that on maps of Scotland, we have to show actually where the Shetland Isles actually are. It's confusing people, and it's not great. So these islands have been inhabited for a very long time, probably since at least the Mesolithic, which is about 4320 BCE. And the climate on the islands is very, very extreme, as you might expect. This is in the subarctic. So very, very short summers where the average high is only in the mid 50s, long winters, but because they are surrounded by the sea and at most you're only 4 miles away from the sea at any point in any of the islands, you do have a little bit of a temperate effect. So the winters, the high is in the mid 30s, which is actually slightly warmer than Michigan. But again, the winters are a lot longer. And there's not a whole lot of vegetation on the island to stop those winds. So the winds on average are about 15 miles per hour, but can get up to 75 miles per hour with gales and storms. And since you're never not far from the sea, every single gale or storm that rolls through, you're going to be affected by it. You're going to feel it. So you can start imagining what pressures that might affect on the people and animals that live on these places. So shortly after that time period, we get people moving from hunting gathering to settlement. So they start building using stone because there's not a lot of trees on these islands, which is an archaeologist's dream because stone survives a little bit better than, say, mud brick and wood. And horses probably reached the islands at about the Bronze Age. And they brought across through pack ice on the North Sea. And that's probably how the first people got there as well. So it is believed, we don't have a whole lot of historical records of the Shetland Isles until the Vikings, but we think the Romans might have been aware that they existed. There's probably no Roman settlement, probably nobody from the Roman Empire ever set foot in the islands. And once the Vikings get there, we have written records now. So we kind of say they enter into the historic record, right? And it's valuable to the Vikings in the 8th and the 9th century because they are using the Shetland Isles as a base to attack both Norway and Scotland. And in response, the Norwegian king decides he's going to put an end to that. His name is Harold Fairhair, and he annexes the islands in 875 CE. So we're not really sure what the population really looked like prior to the Vikings, but the Vikings did disrupt the populations of these islands a little bit. So nowadays, the Shetland Isles are part of Scotland, but that wasn't always the case. Norwegian rule continued until the 1200s. Scottish kings started agitating pretty hard, though, to add Scotland to their kingdom, because again, it's only 105 miles. It's a great base to attack Scotland from the sea. So Scotland came into possession of the Shetland Isles in 1469, when the then King of Norway gives Scotland the islands in exchange for a large sum of money so that his daughter could marry this handsome looking man in the middle here. He is James III of Scotland. And he does it with the understanding that at any point, he or his heirs could redeem the islands. And so they sent an emissary about every 2 years from basically 1469 to the 1700s, asking for the islands back, and the Scottish always ignore them. So it's now part of Scotland. So a lot of probably the horses, the ponies there have been evolving to the climate of the Shetland Isles since at least the Bronze Age. The Vikings would have brought other ponies that were developing in other parts of Scandinavia over as well. And then, of course, during the Middle Ages, there's a big exchange of goods and people and livestock with the Crusades. So it is possible, it's not entirely probable, that Arabian and Spanish stock may have come to the Shetland Isles too and left a little bit of their genetic makeup there. But you know, who knows? So Shetland ponies are typically 8 hands or 32 inches at the shoulder. And the harsh conditions led to a pony that had very short limbs, a short back, a thick neck, and small ears. On the Shetland Isles, big stock would starve. Fragile stock would break. Only the small, the quick, and the hardy and the most intelligent animals survived. Even today on the islands, people will report that the wild ponies there, in the winter, when things are very, very hard, there's not a lot of foraging going on, they will eat seaweed and dead fish that flop up to the shore. So these are animals that can survive in the harshest of conditions. So if you live in Michigan, and we do have pretty brutal winters, and you wanted a pony that could carry your groceries home, if you wanted an animal that could take your children to school, Shetland ponies are a no-brainer, really. They're great. So in 1892, Gilbert publishes his catalog, and he's advertising all the ponies that were for sale. He made a huge deal again that the ponies were registered both in Shetland Isles and in the United States. And his nephew reports that he bought his ponies directly from Lord Londonderry, who was one of the first people to actually breed the ponies outside of the Shetland Isles. And so I'm going to show a few images of this catalog just because I love it. I mean, whoever was the mad person that named a pony Modesty, like, I love it. It's great. How did this pony get named Alice Mabel? Like, why did we give it a human name? Why did we give it two human names? There's really no explanation. Later on the left there, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Gilbert with what he called the midgets, or the smallest ponies that he had on his farm. And he writes this charming little story about, you know, the history of the ponies and how they got to America. And we see Nettlewing here, Nettywing, in the middle. She is one of the prettiest and most stylish large ponies in America. I don't know how they made that designation, but I love it. And a lot of these descriptions too, there's only woodcuts for a couple of the ponies in this catalog. So you really have to rely on the descriptions. And for a lot of the ponies, I love it. It's just like hard to describe. And it's like, well, Gilbert, you're gonna have to try a little bit harder because this is an age before photography. So we need you to describe the ponies. And then at the bottom, it's just kind of showing the range of ponies that they have. So different colors, slightly different conformations there. But Gilbert realizes pretty early on that there are markets for his ponies just outside simple selling. And take that pin out of increased time for recreation, because now we're going to talk about it. So at that time, a lot of people still didn't have like vacation time as we think of it today. They didn't have time to take a full week off and go, say, to the Grand Canyon. But on Saturday, you can go to a local destination like Belle Isle and have a great time with your family. So at this time, Belle Isle is just really exploding with lots of family, fun, friendly stuff to do. There's canoe rentals, boat rentals, picnicking sites, bandstands, and of course, riding stables. So Gilbert starts taking his ponies. Well, he doesn't. He gets his nephews to do it for him, to both Belle Isle and Boblo Island. So if you're thinking about that, you're thinking, how did they get the ponies down there? Well, they took them straight down Woodward Avenue on foot. They would go and hire some local boys from the high school after Memorial Day, and they would walk over 100 ponies down to Detroit. That's 27 miles. And if you remember, I talked about the train station and the trains that were running every 30 minutes. Yeah, that train track is right in the middle of Woodward Avenue. So about every 30 minutes, he'd have to herd all the ponies off the road and then herd them back on once the train had passed. And his nephew Fenton reports that he had never lost a pony. So that is super impressive. And then the ponies would be loaded onto ferries and taken to either Belle Isle or Boblo Island. Because again, the bridge to Belle Isle only came about in the 1920s. So here's the postcard that is currently behind me and that started this whole search for me. These are the ponies on Belle Isle in Detroit, Michigan. And these are from Watkins Stock Farm here in Birmingham. And so I mentioned Fenton Watkins, Gilbert's nephew. He began taking care of the ponies and bringing them to Boblo Island in 1906. He dropped out of high school to go work for his uncle. He grew up on a farm in Grand Haven, so he was used to the hard physical activity of taking care of animals. And he actually met his wife via his work with ponies. So during the winter, the ponies were back at the stock farm. There wasn't a whole lot going on. So he went looking for outside work, and he was hired by a person who had a daughter named Florence. Florence had a pony that would take her to school. And so her father hired Fenton to work with her pony and take care of it for her so that she didn't have to. She could just come home from school and immediately start working on her studies. So you know what, if anyone out there is working for Hallmark and you need a new holiday movie, picture this. A girl pulls into her yard with her pony and she looks over and she sees Fenton leaning against a tree reading a newspaper. It is love at first sight. It wasn't really. Florence was 13 at the time, and they did not begin their romantic relationship until after she graduated college. It's a nice story anyways. So yeah, if anyone out there is from the Hallmark Channel, all I ask is for writing credit. That's all. So he and Florence married in 1916, and they continued taking their ponies to Boblo Island. And in fact, 3 of their 5 children were born during their summers on Boblo. And basically, he is taking the ponies there up until 1929. And I hear what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, how did World War I affect this, Caitlin? And that's a really good question. And this is kind of the beginning of the end of the ponies, both in Birmingham and on Boblo Island. So in 1914, Canada enters World War I at the same time that Great Britain does. America, you might recall, enters the war in 1917. So there's a couple summers there where Canada is in full wartime mode, and the US still quite isn't. So at one point, the Canadian government wanted Fenton and his uncle to pay a duty of $3,500 to bring the ponies over for the summer to Boblo Island, because Boblo Island is Canadian. And that is equivalent to about $98,000 today. So Fenton is like, there's no way. He goes to a manager on the island by the name of Mr. Carmel. And Carmel arranges for the ponies to be housed in Amherstburg, Ontario during the summers, thus making the ponies Canadian and not liable for any duties or taxes. So at this point now, the ponies are no longer Birmingham ponies. They are Canadian ponies. And after the war, things don't quite go back to normal. Concessions on the island, they don't want outside vendors anymore. So Fenton, he's very proud that he managed to outlast 2 years of any other outside vendor on the island. But eventually by 1929, the Watkin ponies were no longer on Boblo Island. The ponies remained in Canada, and they might have formed the backbone to riding schools and breeding programs in Ontario and elsewhere, but we kind of lose track of them at that point. And we know the ponies also, these are the ferries that they would take over to Boblo Island, same ones that human passengers would take. We also know that they took ponies to Palmer Park in Detroit as well, but right now in our archives, we have almost no information relating to this. So if you or someone you know has any information about the Watkin ponies at Palmer Park, please get into touch with us because we would love it. So why isn't Birmingham America's Shetland pony capital anymore? And well, just a few industry and society shaking reasons why. And I know I'm running short on time, so I'll try to make this short. Cars, obviously. In 1913, the Model T rolls off the assembly line, and suddenly cars are cheap, they are reliable, and roads are being paved all over the country. By the late 1920s, all of Woodward Avenue had been fully paved. And in fact, Woodward Avenue was the first paved American highway and was also one of the first roads in the United States to have stoplights. So suddenly cars were practical. And unlike public transportation, like trains, you didn't have to share your personal space with anyone else. Cars were kind of revolutionary in that way. World War I was a big change too. Suddenly we went from peacetime production where we're making consumer goods and people are going on vacations to wartime where we're rationing things. And one of the other things was that Gilbert was getting old. He only had one child, a daughter who seems to be pretty uninterested in continuing to farm. So let me find the exact date that I keep notes because I have a hard time remembering dates and things sometimes. Numbers are hard. So by 1906, Gilbert sold 160 acres of his farm to Fred and Albert Corton, and other parcels were sold off later on individually. The Corton brothers then sold the land to developers, and they start platting out what is now the Corn Lake Estates. By 1916, there was a restriction placed on all the plots in Corn Lake Estates that banned cattle, horses, and other farm animals. So suddenly, within a couple decades, the land that ponies had once ruled was now cars. And ponies were no longer allowed to be housed on the premises. But there is one remaining vestige of the pony farm, and that is 146 Puritan. This is the house that was built between 1855 and 1860 by Daniel Stewart, that was purchased by Gilbert Watkins. And later his nephew Guy would purchase it from Gilbert and preserve it. The house has been added onto quite a bit. It's been rotated a little bit on the plot, but it was the first house to be given a historic plaque in 1980. And this picture is from 1979. So right when they were starting to make that historic designation. And you'll notice instead of a pony in the driveway, there is a late 1970s automobile. So thank you so much for coming to this talk. For more fun stories, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have a YouTube page and of course a website. Coming up next, I want to just plug really quick our next two talks. On May 5th, Donna and Justin from the museum staff here will be talking about Birmingham Stories of War and Service. But they are going to do something really, really interesting and bring first-person accounts from these soldiers, from their diaries and letters that they wrote back home. So you'll be kind of seeing these conflicts from their first person perspectives. And I think that's really, really cool. And June 3rd, you might have seen in the media that we just recently got a designation for the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. Greenwood Cemetery has been added to the sites this year, and we will be talking about why and who are the two individuals who had that connection to the Underground Railroad. So it's something you will definitely not want to miss. It's a really fascinating story, and it's something that we're still exploring and still finding really interesting things about today. So thank you again, and I will open up the floor to questions if anyone has any.
Feel free to unmute, or if you're more comfortable putting your question in the chat, we can always check out there too.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I really get excited getting to talk about it. Who would have thought in Birmingham, that I would have the opportunity to, to talk a lot about horses.
There is a question in the chat. Caitlin, do you know of any, do you know of any pony breeders in Michigan anymore?
I didn't come across very many Shetland pony breeders in my research. I'm sure they're out there, but I just know a lot about larger ponies because I used to ride them, and that's fun. That's an experience. If anyone has ridden a pony before, you know that they are hateful, and I love them. When they talk about in the research, they talk about how compliant children are, for child labor. And it's like, so you went from compliant children to ponies who hate with the passion of a burning sun. Like it's a jump, but all right.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks. We'll do a little bit more job getting the word out. I think people may have been mystified by the pony subject.
And we did record this. So in a couple weeks, it will make it to our YouTube page. So if you know of anyone who couldn't make it tonight, or if you just find my voice so soothing that you want to listen to it while drifting off to sleep, it will be available for you.
Actually, Caitlin, I did have a quick question, but just based on what you were just saying, Do ponies really have a representation, or excuse me, oh my God, reputation for being, I mean, are they really more ornery? Or is that just a thing we like to say?
And so I was on my college's equestrian team, and me and my teammates would always joke about that because, you know, every pony has been abused by a small child at some point in its life. So it just hated mankind, which, you know.
Maybe that's it. Oh, nice. The ponies at Bowers School Farm say hi to all. Taffy, Patches, and Dozer have visited the museum several times.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
amazing. Oh, thanks. Well, I
Thanks.
say hi back, and they are welcome back anytime. I always try to convince my boss, Leslie Pilak, who is the director of the museum. I always try to convince her to put in our budget every year that we need to ask the city for money for a couple of ponies. Just to, you know, bring the Shetland ponies back to Birmingham. And the city manager shoots us down every time. So, and not to put them on blast or anything, but I'm just putting it out there.
You don't get things you don't ask for.
It's
Right.
true. It's true. You know, like we can build a little shed out there for them. You know, drive them to meetings that we have at City Hall. It'll be great.
Too funny. For anyone who's still on, I did throw Caitlin plugged the next two events. They are the registrations are in the chat. The Birmingham Stories of War and Service and the Juneteenth Birmingham's connection to the Underground Railroad. So if you're interested in either of those, this is a good time to register for them. They'll also be in the email blast that we send out, and they're always in the calendar. So, you know, you got lots of options, but if you think you might forget, go ahead and click on those links now and get yourself signed up.
Yes, and the past links are on our YouTube channel as well as our website as well. So if you missed one in the past, you can definitely still go and check those out.
Oh, I see. Ponies equal lawn mowing and fertilizer in a small package.
Right? See, Leslie, we also need to put that in our budget. Like, listen, we'll sell fertilizer to local gardeners. It'll be great. We'll make some money.
Does Birmingham have a like a not a farmer's market, but like a local market anywhere on the weekends?
Yeah, we do have a farmer's market. It's starting May 1st, I think. And also June 5th, I believe, is going to be our plant exchange here at the museum. Thank you for giving me that segue. We're doing a heritage plant exchange. We are looking for heritage plants to put in one of our front garden beds that now houses our new sign. And also June 4th. Thank you, Leslie. And so you can come exchange plants with your friends, your neighbors. And also, if you do have specific varieties that we're looking for, varieties that would have been present in the historic landscape of the museum's past, we have a list both on our Facebook page and our website right now. You can bring those as well. And then you can say that, you know, you're part of the gardens here at the museum, which is pretty cool.
That is very cool. And I think the fertilizer, I mean, who wouldn't buy fertilizer,
Exactly.
locally grown, locally sourced fertilizer?
Right? We'll feed the ponies organic, so it's organic fertilizer. Like we will do it up big.
That's awesome. Leslie, you say it's free. Is that the plant exchange? I assume the farmer's market's free. So is that, yeah, okay. That's cool. Good to know. Another thing to pass the word around about. Everyone's getting their
totally,
green
yeah.
thumbs.
Well, I know the board was just planning it tonight at their meeting, so
Okay.
I had to leave early to give this talk, but I'm sure Leslie will fill me in tomorrow, and we can keep everyone up to date that way.
We'll get the details out. Absolutely. I feel like you and I talked. Does anyone else have any questions? I've monopolized the Q&A.
Any stories of ponies they have known who hate humanity?
I just have to speak up on the behalf of the equines. Yes, they can be ornery, but you know that horses and ponies are prey animals, therefore fear drives their time.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and those three that I mentioned at Bauer School Farm know how to run humans all over the place, but nobody's really ever taken time to
Mm,
teach them that they could, could be okay.
right.
They-
Oh,
they
yeah,
get-
totally.
so it's just, yeah, those little kiddos that live at Bowers are characters and a half, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they all have their own little personalities,
Mhm.
and it's great.
Yeah, yep.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for attending. I hope we'll see you next month. And actually, I should let Caitlin wrap it up before we stop recording. Anything else you want to say?
No, just thank you again for coming tonight and letting me talk about the ponies of Birmingham.
All right, everyone, have a great night. See you next month.
Bye.